Hey guys, Justin here, and what is also here finally is my review of the Nemo Tensor sleeping pad. This is the best-selling sleeping pad at REI, and my review is long overdue. Nemo sent me this pad back in the fall of 2019 to review, but because of COVID, I had a bunch of trips canceled, and I wanted to make sure I really put in a lot of time with the pad before giving you my thoughts on the quality, function, sustainability, and ethics, as well as the specs. As usual, let's first go over the specs of this. This is what the pad looks like in its stuff sack with everything in here. So what you get with this sleeping pad is the stuff sack, as well as an inflation bag that you can use. You get a little bit of a repair kit in here as well that just has some patching materials. And then here is the inflation sack that you can use to blow up the pad, and it works really, really well, and we'll go over that in a little bit here. All of this together weighs 615 grams, but the pad alone weighs 540 grams on my scale, which is the same as what Nemo advertises, which is really good. The pad has an R value of 3.5, which is good for 3-season use, and I'll also touch a little bit on how warm the pad kept me a little bit later on in the video. The pad is made with a 20 denier nylon on the top and bottom and is 3 inches thick. I bought the insulated version in a regular wide size. It comes in an insulated and non-insulated version in a short mummy, regular rectangular, rectangular wide, and long rectangular as well that's wide. So you get a lot of different options in the insulated, non-insulated, as well as different sizes to suit what your needs may be. Now let's talk about features and function, and part of that is inflating the pad. So let's get it on the ground and inflate it. So we have the pad on the ground here. Like I said, this is the regular wide version, so it's 25 inches wide and 6 feet long. The regular wide only comes in the square version, doesn't come in a mummy version, which I would have liked. I would have liked to save the little bit of weight by having a mummy shaped pad. As well as with mummy shaped pads, you can put them head to toe a lot easier if you have a really narrow tent or are using an alpine based tent that are usually just wide enough to accommodate 2 wide pads head to toe. Like I showed you earlier, the Tensor comes with an inflation bag in order to inflate the pad, and there's a valve at the top right corner of the pad here, and we'll use that in order to inflate the pad. I find the valve a little bit hard to use. When the pad is fully deflated, it's a little bit hard to get it fully seated back into its position here. And especially when it's cold, it's really hard to get this valve closed. But then once you get it in, it's actually really easy to inflate using the inflation bag here. So we'll just open this up. There's one valve that you open up in order to inflate it, and then it will only be a one-way valve and air will not come back out when you're inflating, which is a really nice feature. And then if you want to dump air, you just pull the second valve and it dumps air really quickly. And I can't say enough how much I love how well this pad dumps air. When you're looking to deflate the pad and roll it up at the end of the day, being able to just dump all the air really quickly, roll it up in a simple way is a really great feature that this pad has. But enough talking with an empty sleeping pad here. Let's use the inflation bag here and get it inflated. So there's a little rubber grommet at the end of the inflation bag here. You just stick that into the valve until it clicks in. And then there's a narrow opening at the top, and you just blow into that from about 6 inches away, 6 inches to a foot away, and it'll inflate the bag using the Bernoulli effect. So it creates a vortex that sucks air into the bag. That means you have to use less breath in order to get air into the bag and then inflate the pad. So there we go, super simple, 3 bags full, 3 breaths to fully inflate a regular wide sleeping pad. That is awesome. I mentioned I have a bit of a problem with the valve being super stiff. Another problem that I have is when I pull out the inflation bag, sometimes it also pulls out the valve that dumps the air, and then I lose all the air that I just worked so hard putting into the pad. And I'll give you an example here. I pull it out, and because the bag has such a good seal with the valve, it pulls the valve out as well, and then you see I just lost a whole bunch of air. So that's a bit of a problem, so you have to make sure when you're pulling the bag off of the valve that you hold the tab on the valve down so you don't dump a bunch of air. The insulated pad here uses 2 layers of Mylar film in order to insulate the pad and reflect heat back up to your body and reflect cold back down to the ground. It has a really nice kind of brushed soft feel to it, and you don't get that kind of plasticky rubbery feeling that you get with a lot of other sleeping pads. And because of that, it also doesn't create a lot of noise when you're moving around on it or moving around on the floor of a tent. Sometimes on the tent floor, you'll get a little bit of rubbery squeakiness with sleeping pads when you're using them. As a quilt user, I also really appreciate the softness of the material because I sleep directly on the sleeping pad, unlike if you're using a sleeping bag. If you've used pads with Mylar insulation before, then you may be a little bit worried about the pad being crinkly, but I'll push on it right now. You can hear no crinkle at all, and that's because unlike some other pads, the film is suspended separately, so you don't get film rubbing against each other or crinkling, and that's a really good feature of this pad. Out of all the pads I've used, this is probably one of the quietest. I have read some reviews of people saying this pad is noisy, but I don't know what planet they're on. I've used a lot of sleeping pads out there, including some of the noisiest pads on the market, and this pad is quiet. Let's talk about quality, super important thing. One of the biggest things I always look for with outdoor gear is the manufacturer warranty. I love when manufacturers will stand behind their products, and Nemo will do that. They have a lifetime warranty for all their products, so if something goes wrong, from a manufacturing perspective, they'll replace it for you, no questions asked. I have heard of some people having dead on arrival pads where sometimes right away a baffle will loosen and snap, or the valve will leak, or they'll have a seam that just doesn't work out. That happens. Manufacturing defects are a thing, unfortunately. And if you do have that, just know that Nemo will take care of you. Otherwise, I haven't really heard of any issues with this pad long term. It's usually been some sort of short-term manufacturing like defect. I have been a little bit worried with the valve because it's so tight. I'm worried that it'll wear and eventually loosen, and then that'll cause some problems. But I know people who have had this pad for years now and haven't had a problem with that. I've had the pad myself for almost 8 months now and haven't had any problems, and I've opened and closed this valve probably 100 to 200 times already. Sustainability and ethics is, I think, one of the most important topics when it comes to gear or any purchase that you're making. And I've had some conversations with Nemo, and I've been very interested in the ways that they're looking to improve the sustainability and ethical manufacturing of their products. First up, they audit their manufacturing processes, and with that, they look to make sure that their products are being made as sustainably as possible, as well as making sure that human rights are being maintained at their manufacturing plants. Nemo has manufacturing in many different places around the world. The Nemo Tensor Insulated, at least the one I have here, was made in Taiwan. So if where a product is made influences your purchasing decisions, you can keep that in mind. And now on to the topic that you've probably all been waiting for, and probably the most important topic for a sleeping pad, and that is comfort. The Nemo Tensor is touted as one of the most comfortable sleeping pads on the market by a lot of people. And as someone who loves to be comfortable while they're sleeping, I had to pick it up and check it out. First up, something that surprised me was the warmth. It has a 3.5 R value according to the new standard. And I've used the Sea Summit Etherlite XT, which has a 3.2 R value, as well as the Neo Air X Lite, which has a 4.4 R value. And I found that the Nemo Tensor Insulated slept quite a bit warmer than what the R value states. I've used this pad down to -6 on snow and was really toasty, did not have any issues with getting cold during the night. As we've already talked about, the material is nice and soft, really comfy to lay on. Something else I didn't mention was that the material is slightly stretchy, and that little bit of give is really nice and makes the pad just that much more comfortable. It is 3 inches thick, and because of that, I never bottomed out on this pad. I'm a side sleeper, and my hip and shoulder never hit the ground while I had this pad even a little bit deflated when using it. The pad has mostly horizontal baffles, and you can see there's 3 spots here where it connects the bottom of the pad to the top of the pad, and that creates these little dimples. And I find the dimples really effective at reducing the pressure on certain parts of your body that are contacting the pad really hard, like your shoulder or your hip. Sometimes I'm using a pad that has just pure horizontal baffles like the Neo Air X Lite. I will sometimes have an arm or leg fall asleep. And that's not to say that that hasn't happened with the Nemo Tensor. It actually has a couple times where I maybe had a little bit too inflated and my arm or leg fell asleep, but that's compared to the Sea Summit Etherlite XT, which I think is the most comfortable pad on the market. And I've never had a limb or part of my body fall asleep while laying on that. And that's partly, I think, because the dimples are a little bit more pronounced on that pad compared to the Nemo Tensor, which has just slightly more horizontal baffling with small dimples on it. When I'm laying on one side or the other side, I can get right up to the edge and feel really stable and comfortable compared to some other pads where that just isn't the case at all. With all those features, I'd say the Nemo Tensor is one of the most comfortable pads on the market, but not the most comfortable pad on the market. But it has a lot of other things going for it, and that takes us to our key takeaways. So what are the key takeaways, and should you buy this sleeping pad? Because that's the question everyone's asking. And I'd say that while this pad isn't the most ultralight, isn't the most comfortable, it is the most balanced pad on the market. While the Nemo Tensor Insulated isn't the #1 in any of those categories, it does everything well. And because of that, it's probably gonna be my #1 recommendation for people who don't wanna prioritize one thing and have to sacrifice something in order to achieve having the most ultralight sleeping pad. This is probably the best pad for the most people, and it makes sense why it's the best-selling pad on REI. If you wanna check out my review of the Sea Summit Etherlite XT, which I think is the most comfortable pad on the market, I'll post a link right up there. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.